really honored to be with all of you this afternoon, and especially honored to be following my dear friend, Rabbi David Wolpe, with whom I share the dubious distinction of having served on Harvard's Anti-Semitism Advisory Committee. Harvard did not take our advice. So I'm especially honored that all of you actually want to listen to what we have to say. So thank you for being here today. While we were on that committee at Harvard, Rabbi Wolpe and I discovered that the problem at Harvard and elsewhere is not that Jewish students don't want to hear criticism of Israel. Instead, Jewish students don't want people vandalizing their dorm rooms or urinating on the Hillel building. They don't want people tearing down their mezuzahs or throwing eggs at their fraternity house. They don't want their professors spouting anti-Semitic lies. They don't want to be kicked out of class for being Israeli. They don't want people punching them in the face or beating them with a flagpole or threatening them with death for being Jewish. At world-class American universities, all of this has happened and more. As you heard, I recently wrote an article for The Atlantic about all of this, as I put it, this train wreck. And I will tell you that as disturbing as it was to hear Jewish students' horror stories, what was actually more disturbing was to go back to those Jewish students with the magazine's fact checkers and to discover just how terrified they were of going public, even anonymously. And they were right to be terrified because there are real consequences. But today I want to talk about the consequences of not speaking out, about what we are all up against and what we are called upon to do in this moment. The through line of anti-Semitism for thousands of years has been the denial of truth and the promotion of lies. These lies range in scope from conspiracy theories to Holocaust denial to the blood libel to the currently popular claims that Zionism is racism, that Jews are settler colonialists, and that Jewish civilization is somehow magically not indigenous to the land of Israel. These lies are all part of the foundational big lie. And that foundational big lie is that anti-Semitism itself is a righteous act of resistance against evil because Jews are collectively evil and have no right to exist. This story that we are all trapped in, this doom scrolling through horror, it is very, very old. But what is new is that all of you are here. You are all brave enough not to hide. You all reject this delusional nightmare. And those of you from beyond the Jewish community are standing beside us to say that you reject the world's oldest form of hatred and that you stand with the Jewish people. In this moment, I want to be clear with all of you that that is who we are, the Jewish people. When I speak on college campuses, I am often asked, are Jews a religion? Are Jews a race? Are Jews a nationality? And the answer is that Jews predate all of those categories. Jews predate the modern concept of race. Jews predate the modern concept of nationality. Jews predate the concept of religion. Every non-Jewish society has tried to fit Jews into whatever identity boxes it knows best, but Jews predate the box. Jews are actually a type of group that was common in the ancient Near East and very uncommon in the West today. A joinable tribal group with a shared history, homeland, and culture. What I just said was like a paragraph in English, but in Hebrew, it is one word that's 2 letters long, Am. We are Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. the hatred that we are facing right now is very, very old, and its consistent through line is denial. This is the denial of our reality in order to destroy us. People have been trying this for thousands of years, and it has yet to succeed. I'm Dara Horn, author of a book called People Love Dead Jews, and I still cannot believe that my publisher let me keep that title. It's actually even worse than that. I also have a spin-off podcast called Adventures with Dead Jews. And the production team and I were always joking about how we wanted to make merch. Like coffee mugs, tote bags, beach towels. As my sister Jordana, who's here with us today, pointed out, no one's gonna take your seat at the pool if you have a People Love Dead Jews beach towel. If this title makes you uncomfortable, what's inside the book is gonna make you a lot more uncomfortable. One thing that I have learned in my 20 years as a writer is that the uncomfortable moments are often where the story is. My goal is to make you uncomfortable. Today I want to guide you through some of that discomfort, which I am confident that every person in this room has been feeling, and show you how facing that uncomfortable reality can empower all of us. People Love Dead Jews is a book about the role that dead Jews play in a non-Jewish society. The premise is that non-Jewish societies often only respect Jews when Jews are powerless, whether that means politically impotent or dead. In the book, I talk about two different types of anti-Semitism that have plagued the Jews throughout history, and I name them after the Jewish holidays that celebrate triumphs over them, Purim and Hanukkah. Purim, which of course we'll be celebrating soon, is based on the biblical book of Esther, and it is the straightforward story of anti-Semitism. There's a big bad guy who wants to kill all the Jews. But in the Hanukkah story, no one ever says, let's kill all the Jews. Doesn't come up. The goal is still to destroy Jewish civilization, but the way to do that is by making Jews not be Jewish. The Hanukkah story is about a Hellenistic empire that takes over ancient Judea. And at first it's a soft persuasion, where this empire says, we have this awesome Greek culture that's way better than your pathetic Jewish culture, and at first the Jews go along with this. And one thing they do is they build a gymnasium in Jerusalem for the Greek games. They then had to recruit teenage Jewish boys to participate in these games. Now, if you have ever been to an art museum, perhaps you remember that Greek athletics were played in the nude. These teenage Jewish boys then had their circumcisions reversed so they could participate in these Greek games. I don't even want to know how that's possible medically. But what's interesting here is that no one at that point in the history is making them do this. That was simply what you needed to do to be a person who mattered in that society. And it was only 5 years later that the regime outlawed circumcision. So that's a really, really graphic example of Jewish self-erasure, but I'm gonna give you an example that's a little closer to home. Last summer, I was talking to a group of Jewish teenagers who had been on a teen tour in Israel. And a teenager from that group told me about the other Jewish kids who were on this tour with her. She told me, these are kids who don't eat breakfast without posting it on TikTok. But we're on a 6-week trip to Israel, and they are not posting that they're in Israel. I'm going to give you another historical example of this self-erasure that's going to also feel familiar. In 1918, in what later became what was in the process of becoming the Soviet Union, the Bolsheviks were waging civil war in what was the former Russian Empire, and they want the 2 million Jews who live there to be on their side in the civil war. So they created what were called the Yevsektia. These were the Jewish sections of the Communist Party. And the purpose of these Yevsektia were to spread Marxist propaganda among the Jewish masses. And their slogan in 1918 was, "We are not anti-Semitic, we are just anti-Zionist." Did you notice that this is in 1918, 30 years before the creation of the State of Israel? It's probably not about Netanyahu. So we're not anti-Semitic, we're just anti-Zionist. Oh, and by the way, we're Marxists, so we're also anti-religious. So we love Jews, you just can't practice Judaism, support Zionism, or study Hebrew, but we love you. We love Jews. And in the process of not being anti-Semitic and just being anti-Zionist, of course, the Soviet Union managed to persecute, imprison, torture, and murder tens of thousands of Jews. And then later, they exported these slogans to their client states in the developing world, and later to progressive circles in the United States, which is how it happened that 3 weeks ago, anti-Semitic cartoons directly from KGB propaganda were posted on Instagram by faculty at Harvard. All of this is just this broader idea of the broader non-Jewish society editing how Jews are allowed to be Jewish by forcing Jews to fit into a box and to be just like everyone else or else. I think this dynamic exposes a massive flaw in the way we think about diversity. Often when we teach people not to be bigoted, we encourage them to see minority groups as though those minority groups are just like everybody else. And this is like, you shouldn't hate this group of people because they're just like you and me. They're just like everybody else. The problem is that Jews spent 3,000 years not being like everybody else. Uncoolness is Judaism's brand. And this goes back to the ancient Near East, when everyone else was worshiping a Marvel Cinematic Universe of sexy deities, and the Jews are like the losers in the school cafeteria, sitting in the corner with their bossy and unsexy invisible god. Jews have never been cool. And that requirement that Jews have to be just like everybody else in order to not be hated is the fatal flaw that exposes the limits of a society's diversity. Since I published this book, I have been inundated with Jewish readers telling me their private horror stories, their experiences with anti-Semitism. Usually these readers write something that says, "I never told anyone this before, but if you're that person, tell someone, report it to the ADL, thank you." So they're sharing these stories with me. They say, "I never told anyone this before, but," then they say, "Thanks for writing your book," and then sometimes they say, "Can you help?" My other sister, Ariel, when I shared this with her, told me, "Dara, you've become the anti-Semitism Lorax." And the problem is I'm about as effective as the Lorax was. But there's been another surprise for me from in terms of responses to my book, which is the responses I have gotten from non-Jewish readers. I have discovered that there are a whole lot of people with a whole lot of goodwill, people who want to be, in today's language, good allies, and really just don't know how. I have even heard from readers who have said to me, "I'm a recovering anti-Semite." My non-Jewish readers keep asking me, "How can I help?" This is an opportunity. This was my first nonfiction book that I ever wrote after publishing 5 novels before that. And I was very dumb because I didn't realize that when you write a nonfiction book describing a problem, people expect you to solve the problem at the end of the book. My readers now of all different backgrounds have all asked me, "So what's your solution to this problem?" To which my completely tasteless reply is, did you really want me to give you the final solution to the Jewish question? Because I am really not prepared to give that to you. But I have now been asked this question over and over, including by the White House Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism, and I now have realized just how much opportunity we have. My major recommendation to the White House Task Force on Combating Anti-Semitism was that Americans need to learn who Jews are, to learn the content of Jewish civilization instead of erasing Jewish life. There is no way to unlearn anti-Semitism with its denial of Jewish identity and reality. There is no way to debunk these lies without actually investing in teaching people the truth. I think that everyone, whether they are Jewish or not, needs a basic Jewish education. It is essential to teach this to everyone, not only to enhance the Jewish future, but to enhance the American future. And I'm going to give you one example that illustrates this. The foundation of Jewish civilization is Torah, the idea of monotheism, the belief in one God, and the resistance to idolatry. Now, I know half of you just tuned out completely because you think I'm talking about what our neighbors call religion. But remember, Jews predate the concept of religion. What I am calling Torah is a radical idea about freedom and responsibility that applies to all of us. I want you to consider closely for one moment the idea of resistance to idolatry. Today we think idolatry means praying to a statue. That's not what idolatry is or ever was. In the ancient Near East, societies had many gods, and one of those gods was the dictator. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was one of the gods. So when the Jews said that they do not bow to idols, what they actually meant was that they do not bow to tyrants. People have often wondered how the Jews have survived for so many thousands of years, and one answer is the refusal to bow to tyrants. This moment that we are in is going to require us to stop bowing down before whatever is popular, and to tell the truth to ourselves and to everyone else about who we are and about who we always have been, which is Am Yisrael. We are going to have to educate our friends and neighbors instead of being trapped in the boxes they have put us in. We are going to have to explain to them that you cannot put anti-Semitism in the cute little religious bigotry box. That box is not big enough for the lies that Jews are facing down today. You cannot erase Jews from history classes and diversity trainings and then claim that you care about fighting anti-Semitism. You cannot say that you are not anti-Semitic because you only want to eliminate half the world's Jews. The non-Jewish world does not get to decide how Jews are allowed to exist. That is the tyranny of the majority. That is the tyranny of the majority, and Jews do not bow to tyrants. When so many people around us are lying about who we are and who we have always been, telling the truth is going to require courage. At one college where I spoke recently, a Jewish student told me how one of her classmates was making anti-Semitic comments in class. This Jewish student told me that she decided not to say anything because she knew that if she did say something, she would wind up ostracized on campus or canceled or doxxed online. She was absolutely right. But then she told me, I wish I had said something. I wish I had said something. By not saying anything, she ceded that room to people who hate her. She gave up one more place where she is allowed to exist as a Jew. It's true that if she had spoken up, she would have had to live with the consequences for the rest of her college career. But while those people would have been in her life for a few more months or a few more years, the person that she is going to have to spend the rest of her life with is herself. And now she will never know how many people were actually on her side. I know this fear. Even though I am personally the Anti-Semitism Lorax, every time I write about this, I am still absolutely terrified. But I've also discovered a secret, which is the astonishing empowerment that comes from saying what everyone else is afraid to say. In that moment when you finally choose truth and freedom and courage, you don't just discover your own strength. You also discover the thousands of grateful people who it turns out were all waiting for you to say it, who are all waiting for you to lead them. I spoke earlier about Hanukkah anti-Semitism, but in a few weeks we're going to be celebrating Purim. And the Purim story now feels in many ways eerily familiar. Like many American Jews today, the Jews of the ancient Persian Empire were blessed with prosperity, status, and power. One of them changed her name to something less Jewish sounding and then became the empire's queen. But when the Persian Empire announced a decree calling for the genocide of Jews, the story tells us that the Jews of Persia were just confused, confounded. They were probably asking themselves, the way so many of us are asking ourselves today, what the hell is happening here? Those people can't possibly mean what they're saying, right? Sure, it sounds bad to call for the genocide of Jews, but maybe it depends on the context. But Queen Esther had a cousin named Mordecai who didn't want to wait for the context. He was a person who didn't like to bow to tyrants. Mordecai told Esther that she had to go to the king to defend her people. And at first in this story, Queen Esther is like that college student who's afraid to say anything, and rightly so. If she goes to the king without being invited, she could be killed, and maybe even canceled and doxxed. But Mordecai tells her, perhaps this is the reason that you have become queen, so you can use your power in this moment. Queen Esther gathers her courage, goes to the king, and to her surprise, the king is on her side. She only needed to rise to the occasion. We American Jews have reached our Queen Esther moment. We no longer have the luxury of not rising to the occasion. Our enemies have already discovered that it only takes a few loud voices to pass a resolution at a school board meeting, or shout someone down in a city council, or slander someone online. Many of you are in positions of leadership, and all of you have the power of your voices. Now is the time to spend your social capital. Each of us has our own spheres of influence, our social and professional circles, and of course also our local and state and federal representatives. Their doors are open. This is our Queen Esther moment. It is time to go to the king. On that horrific weekend in October, all of us were doom scrolling. But many of us were doom scrolling through the original doom scroll, the Torah. And when we got to the end of the Torah, we doom scrolled to the sequel, the Haftarah, where God says to Joshua the famous Hebrew words, Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous. Today, I offer you the words of the God of our ancestors, which all of us need as we meet this moment. Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous. Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous enough to know what is worth defending. Be strong and courageous enough that you know when to enter that uncomfortable place. Be strong and courageous when you say what no one else has the guts to say, when you refuse to bow to tyrants. Be strong and courageous as you carry forth with you this ancient tradition that insists on the most uncomfortable truths and that carries with it the antidote to tyranny. Chazak ve'ematz, because of your courage, the people of Israel live. Am Yisrael Chai.